Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabarty. Today is Friday, March 1st, so we have a handful of different things to dive into today. We're going to start with some NBA thoughts from last night's games, as well as some comments that Joel Embiid made. He finally addressed the media, the first time doing so in a month following his injury. So we will talk about the idea of him returning for the playoffs. Then in the second half of the show, we will be taking a look at the 2021 NFL Draft and specifically taking a look at the situations that the different quarterbacks were drafted into, where things went wrong. It is expected that 4 out of 5 of the first round picks will not remain with their team next season. And then finally, it is officially March, so we will be giving a little bit of an overview of the college basketball landscape heading into the final month of the regular season and as we ramp up into March Madness. Before we get into the show, just a reminder to like and follow, and for any of our live viewers who, if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can go to gsmcpodcast.net. That link will be scrolling across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Now, getting into our first segment of the day, talking about last night's NBA games, we are going to start out west with the finals rematch that took place as the Miami Heat visited the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets come away with this one, 103-97. Jamal Murray was injured in this game. He left right before halftime in the second quarter. He was ruled out for the rest of the game with an ankle injury. It seemed like it was more so cautionary. He was at first questionable. The limp didn't seem too bad going back to the locker room. But I think that with Jamal Murray, who has dealt with a lot of injuries over the course of the past few seasons, they probably just wanted to err on the side of making sure that he doesn't worsen anything. It was the last day of February yesterday. We still have some time before he is really going to be leaned on in terms of needing him in the playoffs, because they absolutely will, especially with the little bit of extra depth that they don't quite have the same this season as opposed to last. So, seems like he should be back. We will keep you updated with that. Michael Porter Jr. ended up stepping up big for them. He had 18 points at half. Following Jamal Murray's injury in the second quarter, he came out blazing in the third quarter, scored 13 points and 12 points it was, sorry. Yeah, along those lines. But he, I think it was 12 points. He finished with 30 on the night. He did so all of his scoring in the first quarter, and then he did end up going scoreless in the fourth, which was part of a bigger deal for the Nuggets, where the team as a whole just really struggled to hold on to the ball. A lot of turnovers for them, and they allowed the Heat to sort of climb their way back into this game because the Nuggets led the entire night. They entered the fourth quarter up 16 points, and the Heat did rally to make it a 2-point game with just a little bit left in the game. The Heat never had the ball with a chance to tie the game or win, but they did get it down to 2 off of a Jimmy Butler layup with 11 seconds. That was the closest the game had been since early in the second quarter. So for me, as I was experiencing watching this game, now the fourth quarter, yes, the score did end up getting closer, but I had a moment there in the third quarter where I had a little bit of deja vu, just kind of brought me back to the finals in June, where it felt like the Nuggets were just in a different class than the Heat are. The Heat did not lead in this game ever, and it's not that they were blown out. Again, they ended up making this one close, but I don't think it really felt like they were a threat to win this game. I just had faith in the Nuggets all through that fourth quarter, even as things were unraveling a little bit. It was going to be Jokic hitting a big shot if they needed it, and he did do so on one instance. Bam Adebayo actually responded. I thought he was very good in this game, but I don't know. It was just sort of my experience watching, and Michael Porter Jr. said the game had a playoff vibe to it. So who am I to make those types of judgments more so than the players that were actually out on the court? But I don't know. To me, it just kind of felt like the Nuggets were on a different level last night. And I think that that's more of a statement about the Nuggets than it is the Heat. The Heat didn't have Tyler Hero, Kevin Love, or Josh Richardson. So maybe if they had those guys, it would have been a different story. Hero was notably absent with an injury from the playoffs last year. So maybe he is the missing piece for this team to be able to overcome the Nuggets. But they end up dropping this game. The Nuggets are now 5-0 since returning from the All-Star break. Again, I'm maybe coming off a little down on the Heat in this instance, but I think it's just more so in comparison to how impressive I think that the Nuggets are. And the Heat are also playing good basketball. This snaps a winning streak for them. So two teams that we should definitely be expecting to see gearing up for real playoff runs. The next game I have on the list here is the Spurs versus the Nuggets, or the Spurs versus the Thunder, and specifically getting a good matchup finally between Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren, the two top rookies. I know Chet was drafted in 2022 but missed all of last season. So the two top rookie of the year candidates for this season. Up to this point in the year, they had played twice, and both times the Thunder had demolished the Spurs. We did get a very entertaining, at least fourth quarter individually between Chet versus Wemby in the fourth quarter of that game that took place in late January. We saw some real competitive fire as well between these two players. I think that they understand what this is sort of shaping out to be and the importance of the matchup between the two of them. They are these two, they've been described as all types of things, aliens, unicorns, whatever you want to put it. They are 7'2" and above. They are ball handling, playmaking, doing incredible things on both sides of the court. And I think they understand the gravity of how important these two are. And in this matchup, we actually saw the rest of the Spurs team show up to compete as well. It looked like it was going to be Chet coming out on top of this matchup early in the game. He knocked down a three within the first minute of the game, and he was firing. He scored 11 points in the first quarter. Meanwhile, Wemby, he was dealing with some foul trouble thanks to Chet being aggressive and drawing at least one of those fouls against him. He had two. He scored just 2 points, and then it was the second quarter where he started getting the ball rolling and the matchup really started to heat up because the Spurs offense was on all night, which was a very fun thing to see because obviously we know with how young and inexperienced and sort of lack of talent that there is with that team, we know the defense isn't really there, but there can be moments with that offense, and it was just a matter of, well, are they going to have the discipline to stick with it through the course of the game? And they did. They showed up. Chet scored 17 of his 23 points in the first half. Overall, the game was just back and forth. It was a 3-point game with just over 4 minutes left. The Spurs were up. Then from that point on, the Spurs were able to handle the Thunder. There were some key moments from Wemby in this one where he knocked down a couple of threes, and then he had a huge block on a Chet jumper as the Spurs were pulling away here. Chet did have a very nice play, I thought, at one point, starting at the top outside on the perimeter. He drove in and kicked out, I think it was to Jalen Williams, who knocked down a three that was big at the time to respond to one of Wemby's threes. And then, obviously, before we sort of talk more so about Victor Wembanyama, who was incredible, I do want to briefly at least mention Devin Vassell, who I also thought that he looked great down the stretch. And we talk about all this lack of talent around Wemby, and I think that Vassell really is emerging as somebody who can be another building block around him. I was more so leaning towards Keldon Johnson being the second most valuable player on that team, somebody that they should look to keep around. But there really is no denying the offensive talent that Vassell has, and I really like the way that him and Wembanyama have been able to play off of one another. Down in that stretch, they had a couple plays together where at one point, Wemby had the ball up top. He had a dribble handoff where he gave it to Vassell, who curled around Wembanyama, got to a mid-range, and just had a wide-open jumper based off of the space that Wemby was able to create with the screen off of the dribble handoff. So he knocked that down. There was another play where Vassell was the ball handler. He and Wemby ran a pick and pop that got Wemby a wide open 3 look that he hit. Vassell also had a really impressive drive against Jalen Williams with a tough finish at that point, putting the Spurs up by 11 and just about putting the exclamation point. Oh, and Vassell had a dunk on Chet. That was an and one. That was absolutely the exclamation point in the win. So both of them finished with 28 points. Vassell had an additional 9 assists to go along with that. I just wanted to give him his credit as well, because as much as it is the Wemby show, it might not always have to be that way, and Vassell could be somebody that they continue to build around. And I really like seeing that Wemby has somebody that he trusts on the offensive end to run actions off of with. And I just think that it is something that we can definitely at least see as something the Spurs are doing in terms of putting around players, and also just getting to see, whether it's Vassell, whether it's anybody else, seeing what type of two-man action Wembanyama can run. But enough on that. Wemby, on the night, he had 28 points, 13 rebounds, 7 assists, 5 blocks, and 2 steals. He shot 9 of 17 from the field, 5 of 7 from 3. He was the first player in NBA history with 25 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 blocks, and 5 three-pointers made. There was, I think it was StatMuse Extra, something along those lines, the Twitter user, where if you are an NFL fan, you've probably heard of scoregami, and it's something that is tracked. It is each time a game ends in a unique score that has never been done so before in NFL history. It's a scoregami. A lot of people like to celebrate it. This account, Extra Stat Muse, started tracking, I think he called it Wemby-gamis or something like that, and it's tracking all of the unique stat lines that Wemby has that have never been done before. Very interesting. Came across my timeline last night, and it's just because he can really do it all. And there is so much flexibility for what he can do mindset-wise, what he's looking to do, and how it pops up in the box score. But just one more note on sort of some historical, again, some of these stats can be a little bit cherry-picked, but I think it just does go to show how versatile Wembanyama is. He is the first player in NBA history to average 2 or more steals, 3 or more blocks, and 2 or more three-pointers made through an entire month. He had 2 steals, 3.9 blocks, and 2.2 three-pointers made on 41% shooting from 3, I might add, in the month of February. So incredible stuff from him. And the story is just getting started here. Everybody's buzzing about it. I am as well. And I think what's really cool too is the personality is also there. And it's something that, the Spurs need and what the NBA needs as well when we talk about this next phase of the league. The Spurs were on their annual long road trip. I forget exactly what the activity is, but in San Antonio, they always have this stretch of games where they have to play on the road because they host something. I want to say it's like a rodeo or something along those lines. Very Texas. But that last night was their first home game, and Wemby got on the mic afterwards. He said, "I miss this blank. I love it." David Robinson was there in attendance, and he was just looking like a proud father. It was really cool to see, and I just feel like the sky is the limit for him in terms of his individual talent and the marketability that he is going to have and the influence he's going to have on the NBA. Running through the last couple games here quickly, the Lakers edged out the Wizards in overtime. This was just, of course, one night after LeBron's fourth quarter heroics versus the Clippers. Him and Anthony Davis combined for 71, 40 for AD, 31 for him. His 31 points puts him just 9 short of 40,000 career points. He is very likely to surpass that when they play the Nuggets on Saturday. I think it's hard to get on the Lakers' case too much here. The Wizards are terrible. They have now lost 13 straight games, and they did get pushed to overtime by this Washington team. But last night was an emotional win. I highlighted on the show yesterday, there is a very difficult stretch coming up for the Lakers the next handful of games on their homestand. It starts with the Nuggets tomorrow night. And that it is the Thunder, Kings, Bucks, Timberwolves, Kings again, and the Warriors. So they're going to have a lot on their plate the next couple weeks, and I feel like it's probably pretty easy in their position to overlook the Kings a little bit in this one, or overlook the Wizards, I should say, in this one. Jordan Poole did put up a season high 34 points as the Wizards go winless in the month of February. So, again, I'm not going to get on the Lakers too much for being pushed to overtime in this one, but if there is one thing to note coming out of this game, it's how poor the Lakers defense has been this year. They allow 126 in regulation to the Wizards. They played some nice defense in overtime, but I also consider that to be a lot of the fact that the Wizards are pretty incapable of running real offense in clutch situations. They have an offensive rating of just 83.1 in clutch situations this year. That is easily the worst in the NBA, and that is across 23 clutch situations this year. The Lakers had the 5th best defensive rating in the NBA last year during their playoff run. And I think that was a very big piece of their identity because they still weren't all too different in terms of roster-wise, but they were able to make things tough for other teams. And not saying that can't turn around. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt comes back and he adds to that. But I think that is sort of my biggest concern with the Lakers right now, along with depth and being sure that the rest of the guys can step up. But they are currently 17th in the NBA with a 115 defensive rating, and they were even worse in February. They were 19th. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. It was about 117. So not trending in the right direction. Again, not that can't be reversed, but something to note. And again, it's having these other players step up on offense is a big thing for them, but they are very clearly still far from a finished product here, and they need to sort of right that ship, in my opinion, to be considered a real threat. Last two games here, just quick highlights. The Warriors have now won 10 of 12 games against the New York Knicks last night, who, again, the Knicks, they are dealing with a lot of injuries, so they are really staggering currently and dropping a little bit in the standings, but I don't feel like I can judge them fully until we see OG Anunoby back, until we see Julius Randle back, but the Warriors potentially turning things around here themselves, and then the Bucks defense is trending in a very positive direction, where last night they play the Hornets again, so not a lot of competition there, but they had another game of holding opponents to under 100 points. They've done so in 5 of their last 8 games. Now, 3 of those instances have come against the Hornets, so take that for what you will. But they also did so against the Nuggets a few weeks ago. So at the end of the day, I don't know. We'll have to see with the Bucks. I think that they are taking steps in the right direction in terms of defense, but we need to see it happen, I think, against a little bit of elevated competition, and we need to see some consistency with it as well. But that is all we have right now for the first segment. We're going to be taking a break, and when we come back on the other side, we will be talking about Joel Embiid, who spoke to the media yesterday, and we will talk about the idea of him potentially coming back for the playoffs. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just finished up talking about the NBA games from last night. Now we are going to be switching gears to the comments that Joel Embiid made yesterday in the press conference that he had. It was the first time that he has spoken to the media since he left for the past month with the injury after he got surgery. And it was clear that his expectation is to play for the 76ers, and that is regardless of what seed they end up being when the playoffs come around. So that is as far as him playing this season, that is, and potentially trying to make a playoff push. I think that this has become a little bit of a contentious debate of whether or not Embiid should come back. I think that when this initially happened, it was before the trade deadline, and my thoughts were they have tons of expiring contracts. They should try and load themselves up to potentially be contenders for next season and be all in. Embiid has struggled with injuries through the course of his career pretty much the entire time, and I don't think that this is the year for the Sixers to become a contender. I think that there are a clear handful of teams that are better than them in the Celtics and the Bucks. And then even in that middle ground, I think that the Knicks would probably beat them in a series. I think that the Heat would have a very good chance of beating them in a series. And I think that the Cavs would be a close one. But obviously all of this depends on how healthy Joel Embiid is. And after having a serious injury this year and understanding the history of how he has played with injuries, how it's been every single season pretty much of his career, the likelihood that the Sixers are coming out of the East, let alone winning the finals this year, is pretty low. But the organization has seemingly been committed to still making a push this year, which while I disagree with for the most part, I also do understand the reality of Joel Embiid he's not going to play anywhere near as long as LeBron James, especially not as effective as LeBron has through his career into season 21. Joel Embiid is currently 29 years old. He will be turning 30 in a couple weeks. And I think that, he is currently technically in the middle of his prime. He was on pace for historic heights in this season, was probably on his way to an MVP based off of the offensive output he was producing. And now you're asking him to wait until he's 31 to make this playoff push. He's still yet to go to a conference finals. And I think that he probably, to a little bit of a degree, also has maybe thought about the fact that he's not trying to play for, until he's in his mid to late 30s. There's a very good chance that he understands sort of the reality of his situation. He is a 7-footer who has dealt with a lot of injuries, and can you blame him if when he's older he wants to actually be able to move around without pain? So that's all speculation. I definitely don't want to come across like this is something he's openly insinuated, but just a possibility perhaps. And he said regardless of the seeding, he wants to come back for the 76ers this season. The Sixers are currently the 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. Now, in that sort of 4 to call it the 8 seed, there is a very close difference between each team, where the Knicks are 35-25 and the 8th seeded Heat are 33-26, just a game and a half back. So these standings are changing every single night. But for the 76ers here, I do worry about them a little bit because they did have a brief spark there. They had a big win against the Cavaliers right after the trade deadline that looked nice, and Buddy Hield was phenomenal in that one. But they are just 3-7 in their last 10 games, and I don't know if they really have it on either end to be able to carry this out. And I think that teams like the Magic, like the Pacers, like the Heat, all have a very good chance of surpassing them in the standings. If I were to bet one way or another, if the Sixers are going to be a top 6 seed versus a play-in team, I would lean on the side of them being a play-in team. And here's the thing is, I also, if Embiid has the fire that he wants to go out there and he wants to play, especially after a little bit of buzz this offseason that he might not be happy in Philadelphia, if you are the front office that is telling him, I know you want to go play, but you can't, I feel like that could be a little bit of risk of ruffling the feathers there potentially hurting the relationship. And for as much as that was sort of talked about during the off season here, what if they shut him down for the rest of the year and he gets upset and does openly request a trade? Because I think that we are entering a point here where Embiid, he has the MVP, he has the All-Star, he has the All-NBAs, he has the All-Defensive teams, he has the scoring champs. He is incredibly accomplished from an individual standpoint to the point where he's going to be a Hall of Famer. But for him, I think that there is a level of he wants to win a finals now, and that seems to be something that has sort of weighed on him heavily at times, at least through the times that we've seen him talking to the public, is that he is really committed to winning right now. And if they shut him down, although it might be the better thing for them if the team's mindset was to go all in on next season, maybe you upset Embiid to the point where he's so fixated on winning that he requests out. Now, the Sixers will have a lot of cap room in this offseason, so there is a very strong chance that they could go out and potentially find a max contract caliber player out there. I don't know the free agents off the top of my head. I know Paul George is one of them. I know that assuming LeBron James does not pick up his player option, he will be one as well, which would be a very fascinating experiment there. But I don't know if he is going to be leaving the Lakers. It doesn't really seem that way. So, I don't know. The point is, they have the money to go and try and pay a star, but I'm not sure how much true star talent there is that would be a difference maker. I'm looking at the list now. It's LeBron, Paul George, Klay Thompson, Tobias Harris finally, James Harden, Pascal Siakam, who's probably sticking with Indiana, Drew Holiday, Gordon Hayward, Kyle Lowry, the list goes on there. DeMar, I suppose, is an interesting option there as well, but all in all, just not really superstar talent that I think would fully elevate the 76ers to winning a championship. So, I mean, the Knicks were a destination. I mean, they're always a destination that's talked about. But they are a team that was potentially rumored to be a landing spot for Embiid if he ended up being unhappy there. I'm not sure what their cap situation is like right now, but knowing that Klay Thompson is going to be a free agent, I mean, if there's any way they could make a deal work there, they have a Wiggins contract that they are likely going to move off of in Golden State. They move some stuff to go get Joel Embiid, the Warriors do. I mean, that is something. And again, now at this point, I'm just speculating potential trade destinations, and that's not really what the point of this is. It's more so to fixate on the 76ers, but it's just sort of the conversation that also flows off of whether or not you are going to make this decision and potentially upset Joel Embiid. So in terms of should he return for the playoffs, I think it would be better for himself from a health perspective and for the 76ers as a franchise if he were to sit out the playoffs, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen, and I think that on both parties, they're just going to have to live with the consequences. And for the Sixers, I mean, if Joel Embiid really does feel like he's healthy enough to play, who are you to really deny him that opportunity? Because no, I don't think that they will be coming out of the East, but it's not like you're in a situation like the Mavericks were last year where they shut down Luka and Kyrie down the stretch of the season because they were they were in that 9 seed, 10 seed range where they had a chance to not even make the playoffs, get into the lottery, and they do so, and it worked out because they were able to get into that top 10 and draft Derek Lively. The 76ers are currently 5.5 games ahead of the 9-seeded Bulls and 7 games ahead of the 10-seeded Hawks. So it's not going to happen that they are going to fall out of the playoff picture altogether. At that point, might as well give it your best shot. I feel like this is also a 76ers franchise that, I mean, we saw Joel Embiid is literally called the process. What was the process before Joel Embiid was drafted and he was good? The process was losing as many games as possible year after year. And I think that it led to some really negative culture there in Philadelphia. And I think that that's part of the reason why it was so hard that one day they feel like they just have enough talent. It's like, okay, it's time to win now. And immediately they're expected to be a top caliber team. Now, they've had some very talented rosters and they've lost to some very talented teams as well. So and again, with the fact that Embiid has been injured as much as he has, we haven't really had a chance to see how this process works out in its entirety come the playoffs. But I think that it also just goes to show that if there is going to be a franchise that is in the realm of contention right now that could be hurt by trying to not go all in, it is the 76ers. And I'm sure that a lot of fans, I mean, I'm actually curious what Philadelphia fans feel when it comes to this situation as it currently stands, because expectations from the Sixers fans I have talked to is that they are very low and they are not expected to be necessarily real threats. And I think that was, partially damaged even after seeing the collapse against the Celtics in Game 6 last year in that second round matchup. And then to expect everybody to be in on it coming into this year with the injuries that Embiid has dealt with, I can't imagine the level of faith is all too high. But again, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's an easy debate for people on the outside to, say, well, you're not going to win anyways, so what's the point? But I do think that there is an extra level of politics almost that takes place, and the behind the scenes stuff and some of the bigger implications of just saying, we're not a top 2 seed in the conference, might as well not try. Because you play the games because something may happen, and maybe you do come out and you shock a Celtics team for the first time in this iteration of the Boston-Philadelphia matchup, or something along those lines. Likely or not, you have this generational player in Embiid, and I don't know, again, the risk is further injuring him, but if he's 85-90% healthy, I can absolutely understand at least walking into the playoffs saying it's go time. And if you catch a whiff of Embiid is really struggling right now, I'd shut it down then. But I would definitely be open to them entertaining the idea of trying, again, especially based off of sort of the context of where this Philadelphia organization has been over the course of the past decade or so. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We are going to be taking our second break, and when we come back, we will be talking some NFL as the draft approaches, and there is a lot of buzz around these quarterbacks. I want to look back at the 2021 class that sort of became an underwhelming group and reflect on where things went wrong for a lot of these players. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about Joel Embiid and the arguments for why he should or should not return for the playoffs this year. We're now going to be switching to NFL, and I wanted to take a look into the 2021 NFL Draft, and in that case, there were 5 quarterbacks selected in the first round, and now just a few seasons later, it is expected that 4 out of 5 of them will be on a different team. So, just as a brief recap, the Jaguars took Trevor Lawrence at number 1. Zach Wilson was taken number 2 by the Jets. The 49ers traded up. I think important to note, they traded up for Trey Lance at number 3. But when they traded for that number 3 pick, they were undecided on who they were going to select. They end up going with Trey Lance, who never pans out there. We had Justin Fields going number 11. The Bears traded up to select him. And then the Patriots were at 15, coming off of Tom Brady leaving, coming off of Cam Newton having a very underwhelming season there in New England. They stay put. They feel like they need a quarterback, so they take Mac Jones, the last available one, and that is how it all shapes out. Now, obviously, none of these moves have been exceptional. Trevor Lawrence is a very good player. He is the closest thing we have had to him being a franchise guy, and I do think that he can be a franchise guy. He delivered a playoff win in a huge comeback against the Chargers during the 2022-23 postseason, but even this year, I think that he is obviously very good, and he also dealt with some injuries down the stretch of the year, but it's interesting because he came in being referred to as the best prospect since Andrew Luck. And if you weren't following the NFL during the 2012 draft, it was Andrew Luck who was the all-time prospect, the can't-miss guy. And I do think it's interesting. Brief side note is the fact that Caleb Williams has been extremely highly touted in this draft, and now we're seeing some other names be thrown into the number 1. I think it's a little bit of the fatigue that comes with the exercise when you have so many people talking about the NFL draft on a daily basis. There were, at times during that 2012 draft, despite how perfect of a prospect, perfect is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but how highly touted he was, there were still people arguing for Robert Griffin III, and as time went on, there was a little bit more debate. But at the end of the day, the Colts went with the clear number 1 guy, and it was the right decision for them to make. Now, talking back to this 2021 draft, because the whole point of this exercise is to sort of see how it played out, and relate some of the factors behind it back to the current upcoming 2024 draft. So I think that when you look at all of these teams, the Jaguars have had 2 head coaches in the time that he's been there. Zach Wilson has had 2 offensive coordinators. Trey Lance was actually in the most stable individual situation, but I do think that there was a different problem there where, from what it sounds like the stories, I don't think we have 100% confirmation, but it appears that Kyle Shanahan was not necessarily in on Trey Lance in this deal, but the front office really wanted it. So there was a lack of full buy-in from the staff as a whole in that instance. I also think that he was probably just overdrafted flat out, but obviously easy to say that a couple years later here. Justin Fields dealt with different offensive coordinators, a very bad situation to walk into in the first place, and that's another team that gave up future assets to go up and get him. And another example with the Patriots, where the coach was not on board. This was clearly an ownership decision that they wanted Belichick to have an actual answer for the quarterback position, so he takes him, but was never really all too welcoming to Mac Jones. And as a whole, we see the results. And the reason I decided to talk about this today was based off of the fact that Zach Wilson was being was given permission to request a trade. Now, what that really looks like, I don't really know. The market for him is likely very minuscule. I don't think that he's going to be a starting quarterback next year. Now, there are a number of teams that could probably benefit from just bringing him in the room, having him develop a little bit more, and not that, again, the expectations for him are necessarily that he ever could be a guy again, but I think a day 3 pick in exchange for someone who was the number 2 overall pick just a few years ago wouldn't be a bad decision necessarily. I'm sort of a sucker for those types of things, and more times than not, we don't see them work out generally when we see the quarterback come in off of being highly drafted and just sort of have them work out in another destination. That is something that we don't typically see. That being said, Baker Mayfield did just play out this season well in Tampa Bay. It's expected that he is probably going to sign another contract there. So, I'm not saying it's impossible. Him and Tannehill are really the only examples, though, and I think it's in large part due to the fact that those first few years of developing a quarterback are just so crucial for their career clock, and if you screw it up then, it leads to a lot of loss of fundamentals, and a lot of the technicality stuff is just all messed up with these teams. If you look at Mac Jones and the way that this is all played out for him, Mac was actually good his rookie season. He was seen as, he in large part, definitely situation is a key thing to look at, but if you are just looking at rookie seasons, I would argue that Mac Jones had a better rookie year than Trevor Lawrence. And obviously, Trevor Lawrence was dealing with a disastrous coaching situation with Urban Meyer, but Mac Jones led a 10-win Patriot team to the playoffs. Granted, a reserve and the Pro Bowl is a joke, but he was a Pro Bowler. And then we just saw the deterioration. I don't think it was for a pure lack of talent. Now, did he ever have the Trevor Lawrence upside? No, but he could have been very solid, but you saw his internal clock literally disappear, where he was put behind this horrendous offensive line. He was throwing to receivers that couldn't get open, and as a result, he was actually panicking in the pocket when he was dropping back to pass, and it led to some really horrific interceptions. Then he was trying so hard at times to not be scared that he would try and force a play that also led to interceptions. So this past year for Mac was terrible. He got benched on multiple occasions for Bailey Zappi, who is no better than him. So I think that it just goes to show, again, a sort of psychological thing that takes place when you are bringing on these young 20-year-olds, early 20s, I should say, to take over your franchise and be the absolute guy. Zach Wilson was given no offensive line. He did have a receiver. I think that he probably had a better situation than Mac Jones did in terms of the offense he played in to begin with, but it's also Jets fans who are just about, and I say this not in a punching down way or anything, they are miserable in the way that their team, their front office, has failed them as a fan base for years now, and they're just sort of sick and tired of everything. And Zach Wilson, who they took with the number 2 pick, never turned out to be the guy, and there was tons of pressure on Wilson. There was also pressure on Mac Jones to, I know that there was a year in between, but to replace Tom Brady as well. And I think that, it's just a couple guys that had talent, but were never able to actually pan out. And they absolutely do deserve some of the blame here, but I think that the organizations do too. And that's why when we come into this upcoming draft class, we have to sort of consider, well, what are the situations for these teams that are looking to select quarterbacks with their initial picks, to trade up for picks. We talked about the Giants yesterday. I think it would be a real mistake for them to trade up for a quarterback in this draft because of the fact that the rest of the team around them, around the quarterback position specifically, is not good enough to really harbor a great situation to come into. I think that in large part, it could sort of, if they were to, play out similarly to the way that the Panthers season went this year, where it's hard to judge the individual quarterback himself based off of the rookie year because of all of the external factors there. And as a result, they were terrible, and they had the number 1 pick that is going elsewhere because of the trade that they made. Now, for that's just specific for the Giants there. I think that would be an example sort of similar to the Bears, possibly similar to the Panthers. And with the Panthers, it's still very hard to fully evaluate the situation. We've seen just 1 year of Bryce Young, and there were tons of people who were very high on Bryce Young coming into last year's draft. He was just about the clear-cut guy. There were people who had CJ Stroud above him, but there was way more love for Bryce Young than concerns. But starting at the top here, the Bears have the number 1 pick. I think that it's a no-brainer that they should move on from Justin Fields because they weren't able to maximize the years that he had in Chicago, and he wasn't able to show enough flash. Now, I thought that he showed potential this season, but at this point, it is a little bit too little too late, where if he made a Jordan Love leap, that it would be a no-brainer. You can get tons of assets back in return for that number 1 overall pick and know that you have a franchise guy. But you have the number 1 pick, not even based off of your own teams not being good enough. They ended up having a decent season at 7-10, and they're not going to be in number 1 positioning again next year. So they should take advantage of this while they can. The quarterback contract clock is a big thing. That's a little bit of a no-brainer. Washington just brought in a new head coach, a new offensive coordinator. I think it is very likely that they should go with a quarterback as well. Now, I don't hate Sam Howell as a player, which maybe makes things interesting. Again, with all of these picks, there is value that you could potentially get out of it, but I think that it probably makes the most sense for them to go with a quarterback here. And I think that they could maybe be a little bit closer to being at least a semi-good team. They were sort of hanging in there before they made trades at the deadline to sort of bottom out. Patriots is another very interesting situation because I think they are further from contention than either of these other 2 teams. They have tons of holes, and that's where it becomes so difficult, I think, with them specifically in terms of whether or not they should hold on to the pick or not. I'm not an expert on the upcoming quarterbacks. you're going to be getting the third quarterback available here. Now, I like Drake May a lot. I know that there are some concerns with the inconsistencies with him, but if it's not him, and if, again, I'm not going to speak too much on the prospects themselves, but anybody here, would they be able to succeed under the circumstances that is currently surrounding the team? I don't really think so. And that's where you have the potential to take a guy to get a fresh start, but is that your biggest need? Is Mac Jones fully, scraps at this point? I think that in New England, it's very likely that he's not going to have any more success, but I still think that there was at least a version of Mac Jones that could have been a very fine quarterback, and I guess we'll never know. But final notes here, there are other teams like the Broncos, like the Raiders, who, if a quarterback falls to them, they might be looking to take a J.J. McCarthy or a Bo Nix in the teens, where it's just, well, we feel like we need a quarterback. There's one here that could be good. Let's take him. I don't know if I agree with that logic. I think that unless you love the prospect, there's probably a reason, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but unless you love the prospect, I think that you just settling for a position you feel like you should be filling is not the right way to go about building a roster. But I guess we'll see how this all plays out in due time. We're going to be taking our final break here. When we come back on the other side, we are going to be finishing up the show with some college basketball talks, so stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are headed into our final segment of the day, talking about college basketball. It is March 1st, so we are just around the corner of some March Madness. I'm very excited. I think it's one of the best times of the sports year, and this year is shaping up to be an incredibly interesting March Madness based off of the fact that we have had these ranked teams losing at a historic rate. We've been keeping up with the record of top 10 ranked teams versus unranked teams on the road. They are hitting just about 50%. It was even lower than that for the majority of the year, but they've climbed back to around 500, which is obviously sort of comes out to be the means, the average, but I do think that it leaves a lot of questions about which one of these top teams is going to be upset early in March Madness, because I think that it's something that is sort of bound to happen. We're seeing more and more year after year some of the biggest upsets in NCAA history. I mean, if you just look at the past 5 years, having multiple 1 seeds lose to 16 seeds as much as that had never happened before, and now we've seen it twice in at least the past decade. I'm trying to remember. Virginia was probably something along the lines of 2017, 2018. I think they won it in 2019, so it was probably 2018, but that's enough rattling off different years. And then we saw it again last year with Purdue losing, and I think that it's more likely than not that we're going to go another 90 years without seeing it, or however long it had been up until that first Virginia loss to UMBC. And I guess first we'll just start by laying out the top seeded teams. I think that we have 3 teams that are just about locks to be a number 1 seed. That is Houston, Purdue, and UConn. They have all been off the charts in terms of the computer numbers, in terms of the body of work, their quad 1 and quad 2 wins. They are all up at the top. Now, Purdue obviously always is going to, based off of their recent tournament experiences, they are going to have doubts surrounding them. And I do think that this is the best version of the Purdue team that we have seen in the past couple years. Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and the rest of the starting lineup, obviously Zach Edey. But I'm just talking about specifically the supporting cast, Lance Jones as well, where they are all a lot more reliable than we've seen Purdue teams in the past have. But the bench is still a huge red flag to me with the lack of production that they get. And I know that in March Madness, especially in college basketball in general, we see benches really shorten up when the tournament comes around. But I think to not have any other sort of real options going for them is something that really does worry me. Now, do I think they're going to be upset in the first round again as a 1 seed? Definitely not. We're still going to have to wait to see sort of what other, whether or not they are the overall 1 seed and what teams are going to be in their bracket and all of that. But based off of, some of the projections, I think that there are a list of, 5 or so seeded teams that would definitely be scary matchups for Purdue. If you go on ESPN right now, you look at the bracketology, the current bracket that they have, I think all of the listed 5 seeds could definitely beat Purdue. That is BYU, Illinois, Clemson, and Washington State. I'm a big fan of Washington State. I think that they are a great story. I'm sad for the Pac-12 and everything, but the year that they've had in the football and now basketball is sort of a nice ending of the chapter. I think that all of those teams could potentially knock off Purdue. If you look at a couple of those 8-9 seeded teams, Northwestern is, again, this is all going to change over the next few weeks, but Northwestern is currently listed as an 8 seed in this. They have taken Purdue to overtime twice this season. They've beaten them once, so that's a matchup I'm sure that Purdue wants no part of, but there's other teams as well. Texas is interesting. I know that they've been disappointing this year, but they still have had some big wins. Colorado State is a 9 seed in the bracket right now. Currently, Purdue is in the Midwest, and Colorado State is in that same bracket as well. And I think that they could be a very interesting team that could potentially knock off Purdue. So, again, I'm not going to spend this whole time talking about just Purdue, but it's a matter of sort of when are we going to see a big-time statement win from Purdue? Because they're going to be a 1 seed. 16 seed should be fine. It's really then from there, how much further can we see them get? Because they've lost to double-digit seeded teams in 3 consecutive years and have reached the Sweet 16 just once. And in all of these years, they've been some of the top seeds. So they are definitely, in the eyes of the public, I'm not saying they are frauds, but they are a little bit on fraud watch in terms of the country believing in them. The final 1 seed becomes a little bit interesting because there isn't really a true runaway team. If you look at the current rankings, Tennessee is the number 4 ranked team. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think that both Marquette and Arizona, and maybe you can throw Kansas in there, could end up being 1 seeds as well. That's where really you have those top 3 as a tier of their own, and then it gets a little bit messier in that next set of teams. I mean, I like Marquette. I think that Tyler Kolek is a very experienced now player that has had a couple years under his belt, could be somebody that just sort of fits the archetype a little bit of, could be a March Madness story player. I think that Oso Iguodala is also a very good player as well. It's a very good passing team, and I think that they could definitely be a dangerous group as well. I know that people have soured on them a little bit after their blowout loss to UConn a couple weekends ago, but there is still something there, I believe. North Carolina has fallen off since their win against Duke, but this was, and still likely is, one of the best defensive teams in the country. I think that they could absolutely be primed for a run here. You just sort of have faith. I know it's not Roy Williams there anymore, but Hubert Davis seems like a very good coach as well. They have one of the best guards in the country in RJ Davis. I really like Harrison Ingram as well as a forward, and Armando Bacot is one of the best bigs in the country as well. Duke, I would consider to be in that second tier as well. Now, they aren't getting quite as much freshman production, I feel like, as we've seen in recent years. Now, Jared McCain has really come out and been an X factor for them. The way that he's been able to shoot and the spark plug that he gives has really offset the disappointing season from Tyrese Proctor, but he's somebody they can absolutely run action for. When he gets hot, he is definitely a heat check player. Kyle Filipowski holding it down in the middle, and I think that they are decently deep in comparison to typical Duke teams we see, where it's just a lot of the 5-star freshmen that are coming in and sort of running the show for them. I think that they have a little bit more experience along the outsides there for them. They have Jeremy Roach, who is now, I'm not even sure what year he is now. He's got to be at least a junior at this point. But I think that he's a very good operator of the offense. So he's a senior, yeah. Jeremy Roach is a good player, in my opinion. I think that, again, it's just a little bit more of a well-rounded Duke team than we have seen in years past. And then getting into a little bit more of sleeper teams, I suppose. I think that a lot of people are high on St. Mary's this year. They are a group out of, what conference are they? They're the one with Gonzaga. Bad job on my part. I apologize. But they're a team that has really been coming along as of late, and some people are thinking that they could potentially make a run. But on the note of Gonzaga, they just had a very big win last night against San Francisco on the road, as they started out the year pretty shaky, but as the season has gone on, they've been building themselves up more and more, and as a result, they are just about in a situation here where they are borderline winning in. Mark Few has done a really good job bringing them along, and now they have an opportunity to play at St. Mary's this Saturday. And if they are able to pull that one off, a team that is a little bit on the brink could absolutely go to the dance. I mentioned Washington State. I think that they are a very fun story, and specifically one of the players that I am really intrigued in is Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells, coming from Division II basketball last year, was an incredible player. He's another one that has really stepped up as of late, and someone on offense that when he is feeling himself, he can be absolutely incredible. He helped power them to the win against Arizona the other week. They're going to be a little bit probably closer to the 5 seed range. They're currently sitting as the 19th ranked team, but a team that I could definitely see giving one of these top programs more trouble than they were expecting. And then the last team that I have on this list here is New Mexico. Now, New Mexico just dropped a really tough game against Air Force that they are likely hoping to forget. But all in all, this is a very solid program. They've sort of been hanging on to the underdog role, I feel like, over the course of the past few seasons, and they have a couple big scorers. They have Jalen House and Jamal Mashburn. They have been good players for them, and they're going to be likely outside of the top 25 by the time that the playoffs come around, the tournament comes around, but could definitely be in that 8-seeded range that could give a 1 seed a run for their money in the round of 32. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back on Monday. Have a great weekend. We will see you at 2 o'clock then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.